Good afternoon and welcome to this week's CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Today's presenter is John Butterworth, a security researcher at the MITRE Corporation, whose current work focuses on UEFI and BIOS security. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Joel. Hi. So, as stated, myself and my colleagues were trusted computing researchers at the MITRE Corporation. MITRE is a not-for-profit company, federally funded research and development center. They're chartered to work in the public interest. So I guess we'll just jump right into it, and the question to ask is, why should anyone here care about BIOS security? Well, it's the first code that executes on your CPU. Therefore, it's responsible for configuring a lot of security-related configurations, such as system management mode and its executable system management RAM space. Additionally, almost no one is actually integrity checking the BIOS, so if you're a wily hacker and you actually get access to install a firmware rootkit, chances are you have a multi-year backdoor presence at your fingertips. Additionally, from a malicious standpoint, a la the Chernobyl virus that was released some time ago, having to recover from a deleted BIOS is a very time-consuming and expensive procedure in terms of hours lost for recovering the system. So here's our agenda that we'll cover today. I will show you how an attacker can get into the BIOS. I will show you what an attacker can do once he or she gets into the BIOS. Part of this is I'm going to also explain what is a CRTM, a core root trust measurement, and how an attacker can take advantage of a weak CRTM, aka mutable CRTM, to install a persistent stealth rootkit in the firmware. Following that, I'm going to introduce our defensive technology that we've been working on, which we call BIOS Chronomancy, and following that, conclusions and Q&A. So first, I just want to address, we've been working and practicing responsible disclosure. We were focusing our research primarily on a Dell system, simply because they were readily available at the time and they were compatible with our hardware. So we don't want to come off like we're picking on Dell, but we've been working with Dell in a responsible disclosure fashion. Dell is very interested in ensuring that their systems are very secure. So if anyone is inspired to hack around in the firmware and finds a firmware rootkit, contact Rick Martinez. He's the security architect there. He has offered himself up as a POC, and contact him and he will work with you to resolve the vulnerability. Additionally, this is our test subject, aka test monkey, our Dell Latitude E6400, who, as you can see, has sacrificed all for the greater good. We chose the E6400 because he was compatible with our CPU debugger. The BIOS revision at the time that we started this work was BIOS revision 829, which by coincidence turned out to be an extraordinarily vulnerable version of the BIOS, and I'll explain how in a little while. During the course of our research, Dell did release additional updates to the BIOS that implemented better security features. Independent of our research, they actually did this in accordance with the what's called NIST guidance, which came out during the course of our research. And Dell updated their BIOSes to meet their guidance. So, topic one is how an attacker can get into the BIOS. The general methods, well, the short answer really to that is just bypassing access controls. I mean, that's how any attacker gets in anywhere, is bypassing access controls. There are access controls specifically designed to protect the BIOS from erroneous or malicious flashes. For example, some of these access controls are pretty complicated, I guess, from a BIOS developer standpoint. So they can be misconfigured or simply not at all implemented. For example, we have BIOS control, which is located on the LPC bus, I think, of the chipset. Basically, this, without getting into too much detail, this is your first line of defense to protect the BIOS from direct overwrites. It provides system management RAM the opportunity to validate whether or not the person who just ticked bit 0 there to make the flash writable is actually allowed to do so or not. So system management RAM plays a big part in protecting the BIOS flash. Yuri Bulligan Also found and presented similar findings to this in his CanSec West 2013 presentations, as well as his recent Black Hat 2013 presentation. And I have the references on the last slide, and I'll make sure that those get up there for the recording, and so people here can see those and follow up on those if you choose to. But basically, these allow for direct overwrite to the flash. This means you can bypass firmware signing, Windows 8 secure boot, which is what Yuri just presented at Black Hat 2013. So moving along, the next very general method of bypassing and access control is to exploit a vulnerability. This does happen, for example, for signed firmware updates. Sometimes this code can be pretty complex. No one's necessarily validating it, particularly at the firmware level, so there are vulnerabilities there. For example, in 2009, the Invisible Things Lab showed that firmware signing could be bypassed. They did this at their Black Hat presentation called Attacking Intel BIOS. And more recently, my colleagues and I also found a vulnerability, buffer overflow vulnerability in the BIOS update process. The BIOS update process occurs in system management mode. So therefore, if you are able to take advantage of this vulnerability, exploit it, then you can execute arbitrary code in the context of system management mode. And by the way, as I stated earlier, we notified the vendor of this vulnerability a good 6 months prior to actually releasing it, giving them, we came to an agreement as to a certain amount of time as to how long it would take them to release patches for this and such before we would actually make this public. And this affects maybe, I think, about a dozen systems or so. It's public knowledge now with the cert number there. So, the Dell BIOS update process, just from a high-level point of view, we're going to go into how an exploit like this can occur at the firmware level. So the Dell BIOS update from user space works like this. The user goes to Dell.com and downloads their BIOS update process. It installs and executes a kernel driver that takes the contiguous firmware image from the executable, breaks it up into packets, throws those packets into memory with a signature of $RPK. Once that's completely packetized, it flips a bit in CMOS and then performs a soft reboot of the system. Just a quick clarification, a soft reboot means that power is never actually cut to the system, meaning that memory contents remain constant, static I should say. Therefore, upon reboot, the BIOS eventually checks the CMOS bit to see if it's been flipped. If it has, then it triggers an SMI, signaling to SRTM that a BIOS update is pending. The system transitions to system management mode and begins the BIOS update process. It basically scans memory, locating these $RPK packets, finds them, and it reconstructs them into just what we decided to call the image reconstruction space. So once the original contiguous image has been reconstructed in the space, it verifies the firmware signature for the firmware signing, and assuming that checks out, then it flashes out to the BIOS chip, and your BIOS is updated. Now, this is the attack surface for this attack. This is the data that the attacker actually controls in this case. This definition comes from Dell's open source implementation of their BIOS update as they wrote for Linux. And that's not to say that open source or Linux helps attackers in any way. The real solution to this is just to make sure you're actually validating your inputs, of course, as everyone here knows. But it's handy that we actually had this because it helped clarify a lot of things that we were seeing. So the BIOS update process, the first, as I said earlier, it locates each of these $RPK packets. When it finds one, it parses the data out of that packet. That data gets stored into a SRTM data holding space where it's going to be used for later calculations. This is actually more of a constraint, but this was done for, we're pretty sure this was done for sanity checking and debugging, but the reconstruction area, and the attacker actually has to deal with this, the reconstruction area can only have the payload written to if the first D word there is actually George, or GEOR in this case. I think he hand wrote this in assembly So I don't blame him for adding a little bit of sanity checking and such in there. But this is something that the attacker is going to have to deal with to make sure that George is in the location where they want to write their malicious payload. So once the RPK packet is found, and assuming that George is present, the packet data is copied from where it's found to the relocation space. Now notice that the ECX register, which denotes the number of D words that are going to be copied over, is actually derived from attacker-controlled data here. The packet size and the header size. The attacker controls that data. And that's part of the move SD instruction. In fact, both the source and the destination are also derived from attacker-controlled data. Without checking these bounds, this is an exploitable buffer overflow. So what this basically turns into is a constraint-solving problem. The copy destination, copy source, and copy size are all interdependent on one another, and these operands, if you change one, all the others change. There are other constraints, of course, that the attacker has to understand and work around. For example, as stated, the copy destination must have George written to it. The copy destination must be lower in memory than the return address that you want to overflow, because you're going to be writing memory upwards in this upwards. And as we found out through a couple iterations, we can't overwrite too much, or else we die in that inline memory memcopy function, and we just end up with a black screen until we figure out how to reset the system. So you can brute force this once you understand how all these put together, series of for loops and whatnot, and to come up with your candidate evil packet. And this is the candidate evil packet that we chose. First one that came up. So here's how an evil BIOS update works from the attacker's standpoint. Assuming that the attacker has admin access to the machine or root access, this will also work on Linux. It's able to install an evil kernel driver, although in Linux you can just use IOPL to up his privileges, so he doesn't actually need to do this as a kernel driver, but that's an aside. He writes a slice of memory with George to the desired destination address. Then he writes his evil packet containing his malicious payload, as well as shellcode that he's going to want to start executing, because he wants to overflow that return address, of course, so it jumps into his shellcode so he can own EIP. After that, just like in the known good version, he flips that bit in CMOS and then performs a soft reboot. On reboot, of course, eventually the system management BIOS update routine, nothing's actually been compromised at this point, so it's just normal, healthy, pristine code, starts the update process. It starts scanning for these $RPK packets. It finds the attacker's malicious $RPK packets. When it copies it over, that's when all hell breaks loose. You overflow the image reconstruction space from the desired destination all the way up through into system management RAM, which you can do because the BIOS update process is actually executing in system management mode context, so you can overwrite RAM there, and you end up overflowing your return address, thus owning EIP. Thus, the attacker is able to do pretty much whatever he wants, but for example purposes, for here he would target the BIOS flash chip to install a persistent rootkit. I have a video here. Okay, so sorry about that. So what we have here is a BIOS revision 831. This has firmware updates installed and activated. We're just going to go into BIOS setup just to prove this fact. Signed firmware update enabled. Now we're just going to reboot the system. The attacker is going to execute his evil binary. and we'll see what happens. And technically, if that BIOS control bit that I was talking about earlier, if the flash wasn't protected from direct overwrites, technically the attacker wouldn't even have to manipulate and go through all this trouble to overwrite the flash. You could just do it directly from here via kernel driver, or just a privileged app of some sort. So we've written the malicious $RPK as well as the shellcode and everything to memory. We've overflowed the buffer, and just for benign proof of concept, we're just showing that we found a print to screen function in the SRTM BIOS that prints out stuff like flash BIOS update program and such, and we just utilize that just to put in our own little message. So now that you can see that there are ways an attacker can actually get into the firmware, I'm going to show you what an attacker can do once they do get into the firmware. We're also going to talk about what is a core root of trust for measurement, and how does its weakness, mutability, open the door for an attacker to establish a persistent stealth rootkit. Now technically, by the book, modifying the firmware is something that should actually be detected. There's trusted computing technologies, assuming you have your TPM turned on and you're actually looking at your PCR values, but the trusted computing group in their PC client specification defines a number of critical boot time components which must be measured in order to establish a trusted system. Each of these the measurement of these components is, as a whole, referred to as the static root of trust for measurement. Static because it's assumed that you're measuring the same thing every single time the measurement is taken. Thus, you should see the same hash values when you dump your PCR sets, and I'll explain what those are coming up. So each component is measured. The idea is that each component is measured before handing off to that next component. Thus, you're sort of forming a chain of trust, if you will. This discussion pertains specifically to that very first measurement which takes place, called the core root of trust, so it sort of forms the anchor, as you might see it written. It's responsible for measuring itself as well as the BIOS, and then handing off control to, well, what comes next, the MBR, I suppose. So in theory, assuming that this is turned on and you're actually observing the measurement of these critical boot time components, if someone were to install like a boot kit or a firmware virus or just anything like that, you should actually see a change that's detectable. However, I'm going to show you that that's not really true. First, a little bit of terminology. Sorry. We have the Trusted Platform Module, the TPM. It's a security chip located on the motherboard. It has a lot of different functions. Most pertinent to this discussion are its ability to provide a signed set of its current PCR set. It can also provide signed tick stamps, which we'll talk about later when I talk about the actual measurement technique that we can use to detect these kinds of firmware viruses. Next, we have the platform configuration registers, PCRs. These are resident on the TPM chip itself. They're 20-byte hashes. Each of these hashes is intended to represent a measurement of one of these boot time components defined by the TCG. They are set to 0 on reboot. They can only be modified with an extend function. Now, an extend function means that it's the current PCR, it's the SHA-1 value of the current PCR value concatenated with the SHA-1 value of the measurement of the boot time component that you just took. So here's just a example of a measured boot, which is the same thing as the SRTM. It's sort of synonymous. It's just different term. So we see here that the BIOS measures itself and extends that in the BIOS. Excuse me, the CRTM measures itself and then it measures the BIOS and then it extends that value to the TPM PCR 0. The remaining measurements are beyond the scope of this discussion. I'm just going to put them here for reference. People can look into them if they wish. And just to show how our work differs from work in the past, past trusted computing researchers like Tarnowski have actually attacked the TPM itself, like he used an electron microscope to actually try to get the keys and such out of the trusted key store of the TPM. We're not attacking the TPM technically, we're actually attacking the vendor implementation of the static root of trust for measurement. Now, to try to make this a little bit less abstract, let's just kind of see like where the CRTM is located, just kind of like get a little bit lower level, just like I said, just to make this a little bit less abstract. So here we have the Q45 Express Chipset. This is the chipset that's present on the E6400. Looks similar to the newer chipsets too. It contains a processor, memory controller hub that controls I/O, of course, to system RAM, and a ICH, an I/O controller hub, which controls I/O to a number of devices, but most specifically to this conversation, the SPI flash, which is where the BIOS flash chip lives, and the TPM. So I'm just going to simplify this to include just those components only. So when you power on the system, the BIOS starts executing, performs various like generic system configurations, chipset configurations and such. Specific to the Dell BIOS now, it begins processing a number of modules. Some of these modules are completely benign, like they contain like the splash screen image, the bitmap image that you see like whenever you power on your system. That's one of them. Others contain much more important code, such as that which instantiates system management mode and its executable system management RAM space, and of course the core root of trust for measurement. So the Dell implements the CRTM on the Dell, executes, measures what it's going to measure, and I'll talk specifically about what it does measure coming up in a little bit, and extends that measurement to PCR 0. First though, I just want to talk about some general problems with relying on PCR hashes as indicators of a healthy system, a trustworthy system. For example, there are no golden PCRs, golden sets of PCRs provided by the OEM manufacturers. What this means is that the owner of the system has to read their own PCR values and determine on their own whether or not these values can even be trusted to begin with. There's no description provided by the OEM as to what exactly was measured to create these hashes that you see in the PCR registers, meaning that it's impossible for a third party or for the owner really to go in and verify that the values that they read from the PCR values are what they actually should be reading. They can't verify. In our research, we were surprised to find that homogeneous systems can actually have different PCR sets. And by homogeneous, I mean exact same hardware configuration, same model, same BIOS revision, everything else all being equal. Some of them had different PCR sets, which was unexpected and a little bit strange, a little bit unreliable. We were also surprised to see duplicative PCR values in our dumped PCR sets. For example, as you can see here, indexes 1, 2, and 3 all actually have the exact same SHA hash. What this basically tells you is that no new information was measured by the CRTM, or by the SRTM I should say, and inserted into those PCRs. It also technically means that this SRTM is not following the specifications outlined by the Trusted Computing Group. So, now on to specifically what the E6400 is measuring. This is displayed in the image at the top. This is the BIOS, as well as you can see the OEM CRTM. That's actually a typo. The gray slices are actually what is being measured by the CRTM. So as you can see, it's not much. Looking at this picture, you would correctly surmise that it's pretty trivial to overwrite arbitrary bytes in this BIOS and not trigger any changes in the PCR 0 values. And if you did that, you would find the exact same findings that Yuri found with his CanSec West 2013 presentation. He did that to his Asus motherboard. and found the same results. However, this slide's a bit of a red herring. The real problem is not that they're measuring so little of the CRTM. The real problem is the fact that the CRTM itself is mutable and can be modified by an attacker who gains access to the firmware. Because it's mutable, it's vulnerable to your pretty standard run-of-the-mill replay attack, where if the attacker is able to modify the BIOS, he can overwrite the CRTM, modify the CRTM to observe the actual known good hash that's measured by the good CRTM, and of course record that, and then prevent the CRTM from executing, and then pass that known good hash to the TPM to extend onto PCR 0, thus providing the expected good value expected by the owner of the system, who's actually going to be looking at this maybe, thus making it appear that the BIOS is pristine and unmodified when in fact you have a firmware rootkit on your system. And this I want to point out, because of the last slide I mentioned that there was a red herring, that they were measuring so little. It doesn't matter how much of the BIOS they're measuring in this case. If they were measuring the entire BIOS, this attack would still work. It's just an unfortunate coincidence that they were also measuring so little. So let's talk about some really bad things that we created as a proof of concept, just to make the point known that this kind of stuff can happen. So we created a couple of proof of concept firmware rootkits. Each is installed programmatically. You don't have to tear apart the laptop like you saw in the E6400 picture. We created what we call the tick and the flea. The tick is a persistent stealth malware. It achieves stealth by performing that replay attack that I just described, thus evading detection by forging the PCRs. And once it's done that, it's able to modify any other portion of the BIOS, such as inserting itself into SRTM and such, without being detected by current technologies. The flea has all the same stealth and persistence capabilities as the tick. However, it's also able to persist beyond flash updates. So the takeaway here is basically that because of the tick, you can't necessarily trust the TPM. You can't rely on the TPM to save you, but because of the flea, you also can't really rely on reflashing your BIOS to save you either. So here's just a quick recap of how a normal PCR 0 measurement occurs. The CRTM executes, measures itself in the BIOS, taking that hash and extends it onto TPM to extend onto PCR 0. Now when we have the tick installed, the tick, of course, prevents the CRTM from executing, takes its known good hash to extend onto PCR 0 with, thus providing the exact same hash that's expected. And I have another video. I wish I could do live demos of this, but there's no way my company would let me travel with rootkits. So this is a pristine, unmodified system. I hope you saw it, but that was the normal Dell splash screen. Technically that's going to be our only indicator that this system has not been tampered with. So first, what we're going to do. Actually, first let me just explain our little layout here. In the upper right, we have our debug view output, which is going to print out our kernel debug output. We're going to execute our open TPM driver, which was written by Corey, one of my colleagues, to dump our PCR values. We're going to grab PCR 0, and we're going to store it in a text file that's on the bottom right. Now we're going to install what we refer to as a naive rootkit. This naive rootkit is one which can be trivially detected by simply observing the PCRs. In other words, it doesn't have any stealth capabilities whatsoever. So what it's going to do, is modify the splash screen. Because the splash screen, as I stated, is one of those modules that actually is being measured by the core root of trust for measurement on this system specifically. So what we expect to see when we log in and run our open TPM driver to dump our PCR set is that the PCR 0 value should be different from the original known good PCR 0 value. So we're grabbing a PCR0 value now. And I'm just going to pause real quick because it goes by pretty quick. But you can see that this hash does not match the original hash. So yes, this is a naive, easily detected firmware rootkit. Now we're going to install the TIC, which has that stealth capability. And the TIC is also going to install a splash screen, which also, according, as we've seen, should change that value in PCR0. But of course, what we expect to see is that the PCR0 value will in fact match the known good PCR0 value that we measured the first time of the pristine version. And once again, run OpenTPM. And by the way, we released the source code to OpenTPM, and I have a link to that too. If anyone here wants to start playing around with their PCR sets, at least you can dump them and take a look sometime. It's pretty cool. It's open source, and so you have the source code. So yes, as we expected, the hash, the PCR0 hash produced by the TIC's replay forgery does match, in fact, the known good, the expected good value. And now I'm going to talk about the flea, as I mentioned earlier. It has the exact same stealth capabilities of the TIC. However, it's also achieved persistence beyond BIOS reflashes. So it does this by hooking the update process in system management mode. So therefore, of course, it senses when there's a BIOS update coming. It clones itself into the constructed firmware image, at which point it simply permits the update process to continue, and the flea, has persisted to the next BIOS revision. So what we have here is a BIOS revision A29, very vulnerable version. The flea is actually already installed. Just in the interest of saving time, the flea is already present on this, so I'm not going to show the stealth capabilities of the flea because it's the exact same as the TIC. But what I am going to show is how it can persist from one BIOS revision to another. So currently we're at BIOS revision A29, and we're just going to upgrade that. We're going to be good doobies and upgrade our BIOS because Dell has released a new version that has signed firmware updates and all kinds of good security features. And this is just Dell's standard update utility. There's a lot more code changed for this firmware rootkit than there was for the others, which is why it has to actually erase and overwrite a lot more of the flash to actually perform the installation. But it's still only 500 and something bytes. It's reasonably small. So we've updated our BIOS to BIOS revision A30, and the splash screen, hopefully you notice that it's changed, and now the flea is saying I live. The flea has persisted to the next BIOS revision. So the next question to ask is, what can possibly defend against such stealth rootkits? Well, we created BIOS Chronomancy, which is our firmware implementation of what's called timing-based attestation. The general idea behind timing-based attestation is to build your software so that if it's modified, it runs slower. And it uses a timing side channel to provide constant run times in the absence of an attacker, and therefore increased runtimes in the presence of an attacker. The TPM chip, we use the TPM chip. It provides tick stamps and actually has a nice little parallel non-CPU connected clock, which provides signed tick stamps. So it's pretty reliable and trustworthy for this service. The idea of BIOS chronomancy is it's supposed to replace only that core root of trust for measurement, that first measurement that measures itself in the BIOS, and no other parts of the static root of trust for measurement. There's a lot of work in this space, so I'll throw out a couple references. There's a lot of work out of Carnegie Mellon University. Seshadri's written a couple papers on this. Also here at Purdue, Rick Cannell did some work about establishing the genuinity of remote computer systems, and he's using timing to basically determine whether or not a system is a native client or a not a virtual machine, but a virtual. I'm going to have to say virtualized and just leave it at that, but that's not the word. Simulated machine. That's not the word either. Sorry. So, BIOS chronomancy has two basic components. It has a self-check looping construct. This is the self-measurement, and this is what really will add to the measurement times. This is where you'll see the greatest increase in measurement times if an attacker is trying to hide in the presence of BIOS chronomancy. And then we have the linear sweeps, and this is what's going to measure the rest of the stuff, like the BIOS, your option ROMs, and any other parts of the system that you want to measure, as specified by the TCG. The self-check has some basic requirements. It's required, of course, to read its own data, its own executable binary, its own code. It also has to read the location of that data as well as the instruction pointer that's actually doing the reading, because the location in this case is just as important to keep track of as the actual data that you're reading. There's also a nonce and a pseudo-random number which is used to produce a pseudo-random walk through those blocks, which I'll show you shortly. And it does all this millions of times, because when you modify and add an instruction and then re-execute that instruction, say millions of times, the time adds up. So we have so each of these blocks contains data like this that has to be accounted for. So we have our nonce, our data pointer, our dereference data pointer, our instruction pointer, all mixed in that modify the checksum as the measurement continues. Each of these blocks differs slightly from one another. They're not all identical, like we change the order of operations and such, just so that the attacker can't really modify just one of them and sort of like fake the attack. If he modifies one, he has to modify all the blocks, is the general idea behind that. So we have, so as I said, we take a pseudo-random walk based on that nonce. So basically we just iterate through these loops in just pseudo-random fashion, say 1,000,000 times. We've actually done experiments, which I'll show you the results for, at 625,000 times, 1.25 million times, and 2.5 million times. And pretty much anything over 625,000 times is a pretty measurable difference. So the other component of BIOS chronomancy is the linear sweeps. As I stated, this just executes and measures specifically those ranges like system management RAM, the BIOS, of course, and other parts, other security important parts that need to be measured. Option ROMs and such, defined by the TCG, is one of those critical boot time components. So just to hopefully illustrate this further, let's take an example from an attacker. Let's say the attacker wants to install a tick or a flea on the BIOS. So we have our little red code here, which just says, the attacker has modified the BIOS flash chip. He's gotten access to it. He has this code there, but he knows that there is BIOS chronomancy code here. So he knows that if he does nothing, he's going to be trivially detected by the linear sweeps. When these linear sweeps run and measure the BIOS, if the attacker does nothing, isn't able to get out of the way or modify the linear sweeps at all, he's going to be trivially detected. So the attacker wants to modify those linear sweeps. So he basically, in a pseudocode fashion, if you are measuring my hook location, my location in the BIOS, here, substitute in good bytes that you expect to see from a stash which the attacker knows that they aren't measuring. However, knowing that there is the looping construct, because he's modified the linear measurement code, and he knows that these looping constructs serve to measure the entirety of this code here, from the linear measurements all the way up to the beginning of the BIOS chronomancy. Because of that, he also has to forge every single one of these blocks. This is where the time really starts to add up. Even if he's just throwing in a couple instructions in there, if you're looking at my data pointer, if you're trying to read my address where I'm at and I'm trying to hide, substitute in this good data. When you iterate over this a million times, you'll see that it adds up to milliseconds, which sounds slow to us, or sounds fast to us rather, but to a CPU that's a very slow amount of time. So we have performed some experiments on 18 Dell Latitude E6400 laptops, running in these loop configurations of 625,000, 1.25 million, and 2.5 million. The experiments were run in two parts. We have a clean BIOS configuration, BIOS chronomancy configuration that just measures itself and produces its known good timestamps. And then we have a bare minimum attacker. And we really tried to spot the attacker every advantage possible. We played around with the caching to make sure that there were no cache collisions from where he was storing his code, as well as where he was accessing his forged stashes from. Also, not to get too much into it, but some of those modules that I was talking about, if you modify them, they'll change the size. And if you change the size on that, then that actually adds a lot of time in the linear sweeps. So we made sure that the known good code actually had the exact same size of the modules, so that the overhead on both would be equal in that respect. So basically, what we have here as a result, you can see that in some instances here, the attacker actually wins. Some of these outliers down low where the code for some reason ran a little bit faster than at other times, and here you'll see that sometimes the code ran a little bit faster, slower rather, for the known good, and there's an overlap there. So sometimes the attacker can evade detection in this respect. But over multiple reboots and executions and measurements and such, I think that you'll find that even in that case where the attacker wins once in a while, chances are you're still going to see that there are enough anomalies of different unexpected timing amounts that you will still actually detect the attacker. Where it really starts to pay off is when you increase to 1.25 million self-check iterations. In this, the attacker doesn't even get close. And the difference between the known good BIOS chronomancy code and the attacker forged value is about 32 milliseconds. Actually, in the previous one, it was only 4.8 milliseconds, which I guess is cutting it a little bit close. But 32 milliseconds is, from the standpoint of a 2 gigahertz or more CPU, that's a lot of time. And 2.5 million self-check iterations, just to ram it home even more, the difference between the two is about 128 milliseconds. Now, of course, it's not perfect. There are TOC-TOW attacks, time of check, time of use. This means that the attacker is somehow aware beforehand that a measurement is about to occur. It's able to remove itself from the BIOS, like say jumping onto the gigabit Ethernet LAN or some other external device that has its own CPU so that it can execute code and move itself back at some point. It gets out of the way. BIOS chronomancy starts its measurements. The self-check completes. All the measurements are done, and then the attacker moves itself at some point back into the BIOS, thus maintaining its presence, even though timing-based attestation thinks that everything's clean and good. The timing measurements check out okay, as well as the checksum also checks out okay. So, in conclusion, it's best to assume that attackers can get into your firmware. Bad things can happen when an attacker gets into your firmware. I don't think that people should blindly trust trusted computing implementations, as well as I'd like to see more openness from the OEMs too, and actually sharing with industry, I guess, with the rest of industry as to what exactly is being measured, so that people can go in and maybe verify these measurements and such. I think we try to show that as long as this kind of stuff is possible, even if it's not exactly commonplace, you can't entirely rely on trusting your core root of trust or measurement in your trusted computing technologies. I mean, right now this stuff's pretty difficult, but in 5 years, who knows, this might even be easy. It's just the way people, evolve. To the argument as to people should use TXT technology, Invisible Things Lab has actually shown that TXT and a dynamic root of trust can actually depend on the static root of trust values derived from the SRTM. And I guess I actually have enough time to talk about another tool that we created sort of as an offshoot of this. As I was talking about earlier with those access controls, we released a binary that's free for use. Anyone can download it. Here's the link is here. The only thing we ask in return is to share the data that it collects with us. The data that it collects is just the BIOS control settings and other firmware settings. So basically what we're doing is we're researchers, and we're trying to create our next research paper, which is trying to figure out how prevalent is this problem in industry of having vulnerable firmware. So we want to say, X percentage of systems have the BIOS control wide open, meaning that the flash chip is directly vulnerable to direct overwrites and such like that. So the data collected pertains specifically to BIOS control, protection range registers. It does collect the host name of your CPU, but you can use an anonymizer script to remove that kind of stuff. We provide that just because we've been licensing this out to companies in industry who are using this, just to kind of get an idea of what their firmware vulnerability standpoint looks like. If anyone watching this is working for a company that's developing a security tool or something like that, you can probably actually obtain the source code for this. For the free for use, right now it's just the binaries, so we have 64-bit and 32-bit as well. Right now it's just Windows, but we're going to be releasing a Linux application binary as well too that will do this. Let me make sure. So if anyone here has any questions, you can either ask now, or these are this is my email address as well as my colleagues' email addresses, specifically for the Copernicus tool. If you have any inquiries about that, you can send an email to that one specifically. We all check that. Let's see, if anyone here wants to learn more about TPM's reverse engineering, x86 architecture, basically like really low-level firmware stuff, not just low-level firmware, but mostly, opensecuritytraining.org, opensecuritytraining.info, training.html. We offer these. Basically, you can just download the courses for free. All the information's for free. If you happen to know about this stuff, you can take the courses and go teach it yourself too. Let's see. As I mentioned earlier, Corey wrote that Open TPM driver, which allows you to download and check out your Pcr sets. So you can download the source for that. You can play around with that too if you want. That's at code.google.com/p/OpenTPM. And let's just make sure that the references get also put on the video, so if anyone also wants to follow up with that. And I think I actually finished 10 minutes early, which is good because sometimes this thing goes like 90 minutes. So I had to chop a lot because I was worried about time. So This presentation that you just saw was adapted from our Black Hat 2013 presentation just this past, the last month that we presented this at. So modified slightly for editing for time. I think that's about. That's it. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit. Any inquiries?